We wanted to welcome you, of course, to the Capacity Building series by the Capacity Building Institute, and I'm so happy to be working with Kristina and so many great people at the Institute. We're going to be focusing on, and we do focus on, small shops and the Canadian environmental organizations. So we're going to be focusing on that as well today, and this is our whole focus. We've got a great mandate with this organization. We're going to learn all about that. The series really is going to alternate. 1 month it's going to be like today, how to be an executive director. And the next month is going to be how to be a board member, which is also a very important topic that's close to my heart. So we appreciate that. And of course, today is how to be an executive director. We're going to first hear from Corey from the Capacity Building Institute, and she's going to set us up for success. Corey.
Perfect. So I just want to give a quick intro if this is your first time with the Capacity Building Institute. I want to give us a little overview about who we are, our vision, what we offer, some testimonials, and more information about the Capacity series and our team, and how you can sign up for more events. So CBI was founded by Kristina Inrig, who has a passion for philanthropy, faith, and community involvement. She's been involved in many philanthropic organizations since 2007, and she was inspired to help build better leaders in the environmental sector in Canada. With that, our goal is to strengthen small shop environmental organizations so they can sustain themselves, grow, and fulfill their missions. CBI aims to collectivize and spread knowledge throughout the sector. Our vision is to train 10,000 leaders of small shop nonprofit environmental organizations in Canada within the next 10 years. While this may seem like a big vision for a small NGO, we're actually well on our way with our 4 different training certificate programs. The first of which is our flagship program called the Capacity Building Certificate Program. And this program is designed for those who already have leadership experience in environmental organizations. So those who are managers or executive directors will find a lot of value in this program. It runs for 6 months and covers 6 core modules in depth, which are financial management and fund development, governance and board development, volunteer engagement and human resources, communications and outreach, risk management and legal issues, and then lastly, leadership and organizational culture. Our next program is the Internship Training Program, which is designed for those who are just starting out in the sustainability sector. We've actually had a huge success this year, and we've hired over 50 interns who are now off doing good work at other environmental organizations. We also have our fundraising intensive course, of course, the Capacity series, and we're even developing an impact investment course. We value our feedback, and so here's a great testimonial from Mara Shaw, who is the executive director at the National Farmers Union. She says the Capacity Building Certificate Program provided her with practical tools, inspiring speakers, and one-on-one coaching to help expand her organization's capacity. We also have a testimonial from one of our interns, Ashna, who works at Biosphere EcoCities Canada. She felt that this training program gave her a better and deeper understanding of effective fundraising, grant writing, creating media content, partnership forming, public speaking, and youth engagement. As a whole, she felt this program taught her more about the nonprofit sector and provided her with everything that was required to be successful as she moved from her internship into a placement position. So our 2 main programs, the Capacity Building Certificate Program and Intern Training Program, require much more of a time commitment since they both run for 6 months. And we wanted our knowledge to be accessible for those who may not have that time, which is why we created the Capacity series. Many organizations we worked with really struggled with governance, particularly working efficiently with constraints like limited labor and time, and transitioning their existing staff to leadership roles, and also strengthening and improving existing members' capabilities and governance structures. This series is free, online, and just once a month. And as Sam mentioned, we alternate between 2 topics. So today we'll be focusing on how to be an executive director. But next month, we'll be talking about how to be a board member. We'll discuss fundraising, governance, and get into specifics about different board roles. This session won't be until Monday, November 1st from 6 to 7 p.m. So please save the date. And I just want to give a quick intro to our amazing hosts. So you just heard from Sam Laprade, who is a certified fundraising executive, who's been in the sector for more than 28 years. She provides training on fund development, board relations, engagement, implementation strategy, and she's also the host of the Sam Laprade Show, as well as An Hour to Give. We'll be hearing a lot from Kristina today, who is the president and founder of the Sustainable Capacity Foundation, which is an organization that works to provide grants and fundraising opportunities to nonprofits. She has extensive leadership experience and knowledge about impact investment and alternative financing models for nonprofits. So with her extensive experience, her expertise follows networking, partnership development, fundraising, NGO management, and governance. Next month, we'll be hearing from Barb King, who has over 20 years of experience in the sustainability sector and provides training and support to organizations on management, youth mentorship, executive leadership, and governance. She's also the executive director of Watersheds Canada, and Barb actually has designed and led the development of key shoreline conservation and restoration initiatives that are becoming touchstones here in Ontario. Last but not least, we have Alex Keenan, who is a public speaking and communications consultant who has served on boards and committees for many different nonprofits, including grassroots, provincial, and national organizations. She's worked as legal counsel for First Nations in Ontario and Quebec, and now runs her own business, Stage Light Communications, which provides communication strategy, training, and facilitation for organizations and professionals. I want to take a quick moment and ask what you would like to see from the Capacity Series. This is our first time running our event, and we're always looking for feedback and ways to improve and grow. So if you have any questions, you can either drop that in the Q&A chat and have that answered at the end of our presentation, or if you have a more in-depth question, feel free to shoot us an email at info@capacitybuilding.ca. This event is brought to you by our amazing staff members, board members, and our incredible partners. If you're interested in more training events, please visit capacitybuilding.ca/events and save the date for our upcoming series, Monday, November 1st from 6 to 7 p.m. and Monday, December 6th from 4 to 5 p.m. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Corey. That was fantastic, a great overview for us. If you haven't had the opportunity to meet Kristina Inrig, you are in for a treat. We've known each other, I know how many years, because I was pregnant at the time. We've known each other 14 years, and always a pleasure to work with. Of course, Kristina Inrig is the president of the Sustainable Capacity Foundation. She's a guest speaker, of course, for the Capacity Building Institute. She's been an executive director, if you can believe it, in the environmental sector for 16 years, which is incredible. And it's really my pleasure and my honor to spend time with you today. Hi, Kristina.
Hi, Sam. I'm happy to be here.
It's so great because normally the chats are just between you and me, and now we get to chat with all sorts of people.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm really excited about with this series, to work with you, is because I feel like it's just a conversation between the two of us, and hopefully we can share some insights that will benefit executive directors and board members all across the country.
Absolutely. When you were a little girl and you were in kindergarten and the teacher said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Kristina, did you say you wanted to be an executive director?
I have to say I did not think that. In fact, I wouldn't have even known what an executive director was. But for sure, for me, it was trying to figure out how can I do something to share back to the environment. So I did start an environmental group when I was 12 called Help Our Only Planet. And we did bottle drives and neighborhood things. So I was always very passionate about the environment, even at a young age.
And your passion absolutely has not wavered. It's really incredible to see how far you've come. You're just a joy to work with, as I said. When we think about an executive director, especially in the climate that we're in right now, Kristina, what do you think the biggest challenges are?
Well, there are so many challenges to being an executive director, and that's what I think why this series is so important, because one of the biggest challenges is that we feel alone sometimes as an ED. When I started, I was a recent graduate from my undergraduate degree at Carleton, And I had taken a job as a small shop ED for 10 hours a week. This was back in 2005. I was the executive director of Tucker House Renewal Center, east of Ottawa. And at that time, I really just wanted to learn how can I do this job of managing this really small organization, and how can I learn from others? And what I felt at the time was that it was kind of a lonely job. And so since then, I've been working to put things in place to really help work with other people, because it's so much more fun when you have other people to collaborate with and to work with. And so that was my biggest learning, is that while it feels like you're alone as the manager, as the executive director of a small organization, if you reach out across to the network and the people that you can collaborate with, other EDs, other partners, my biggest lesson was that you can really build that community, that spirit of collaboration, by finding others who are in a similar boat. And that's really what we're trying to do here with this series.
And I have to say, like, hearing you speak that way, there's a little bit of vulnerability there, right, Kristina? Like putting your hand up and saying, I'd like to create some community around my position. I'd like to help you, hoping you can help me. But sometimes we're a bit shy to do that because we've been given this title of executive director and we're supposed to know everything, right? Which just isn't the case.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, I was a recent grad from my undergraduate degree, and I didn't know anything about being an executive director. So at that time, 16 years ago when I started, I was like, well, how do I learn all these skills that I think about all these other people doing? And so that is where I think community really matters. And what I've learned is people are so willing to share and to collaborate. I mean, that's really how you and I met, Sam. Sam was teaching a program for Volunteer Ottawa, and she was training on fundraising. And at the time I was like, man, I don't know anything about fundraising. How am I going to take this $30,000 a year organization and turn it into something bigger, and to support this property and this vision for this community? And so I went to this information session, and Sam was the trainer, and it really spoke to me, the things that you were talking about, and just kind of stuck with me. And I was the kind of lone environmentalist in the room, right? I was there representing the environmental community, and pretty much nobody else was there from an environmental group. But the things that you were sharing really helped. And so that was my other big lesson, was learn from the people who are out there willing to teach, willing to support you. And that I think it was only in the last couple of years where I reached back out to you, Sam, because I was like, I remembered that conversation we had, that training you did was so impactful to me as a young executive director starting out my career.
That's really great. And I really appreciate that. It makes me feel great. And I'm glad we connected again. We're seeing a lot of different people from Ottawa, of course. We're seeing some people from Montreal. We're seeing somebody mentioning, which is really important, from the unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, which we appreciate that. Winnipeg, Spencerville. We love Spencerville. Gananoque, Arnprior. Oh, Arnprior. Butter tarts is what I think about when I think about Arnprior. We've got Moncton and Holland Landing. I don't know where Holland Landing is. That's fantastic. Beautiful name. And we're seeing people from Toronto. So it's great that there's so many people near Newmarket. Thank you so much, Taryn, for sharing. Holland Landing is near Newmarket. I've learned something today. You mentioned the skills, Kristina, for somebody to be an executive director. And there's those soft skills and those, hard skills, obviously, that you need as well. Walk me through some of the skills that you think are most important to be an executive director.
Yeah, for me, I think if I had to pick 3 things that I needed to focus on as an executive director, because I know we have lots of little fact sheets and lots of tools out there, but sometimes it's just too much information. And so for me, there are 3 things that I focus on first. And the first one is the money. So what's happening with the money of the organization? How are the books being managed? What are the numbers? And that includes both bookkeeping as well as fundraising, and just getting your head around it, because not all of us are born with a willingness and excitement around financial management, right? I know for me, it comes easy, but it doesn't necessarily feel that way for everybody. But having a handle on the money side of the organization is really important. One of the first things that happened to me as an executive director in this job that I mentioned is I actually got laid off after a very short amount of time, because I didn't realize that there was a mistake with how the books were being kept. So in that experience, we had a volunteer treasurer who was using Excel spreadsheets and totaling the numbers, and I had only been there for a few months. And one of the sum one of the sum column totals was incorrectly added, and it looked like we had $10,000 less than we did. And so even though I had been told I have 6 months to kind of raise my own salary, I was laid off before that time because of it. And I thought, this doesn't sound right. There's something not right about this. And as I looked into the numbers more and looked at the charts, I realized it was literally just a mistake with how the column was totaled. So I was able to be hired back and solve the problem. But my first lesson from that experience was I need to understand the dollars and cents as an executive director. And so we set up a bookkeeping system and we learned how to do that. And that was really important for me. So that's my number one thing, is understanding the money, but not just the financial management side, also the fundraising, which of course you, Sam, are way more of an expert than I am on this. And you guys will get to hear from Sam at another one of our sessions on this very topic of fundraising and how to really, make that work for both you as an executive director and also for board members. But money is number one. Number two is your board. So who are the people that care about the organization and are standing behind it from a governance point of view? There's no perfect way to make a board. There's no like, do this and the board is going to work. And it doesn't matter what your board is like. You can work with them in some way, right? So figuring out who are those people that have committed to being part of the governance structure of the board. And if there's a crisis of governance, which I've been involved in many organizations where they've been down to 3 board members, and maybe their legal requirement was that they had to have 5 and they were having to meet every 60 days in member meetings to try to solve this problem. That does happen sometimes. So if there's a crisis in governance, you have to obviously solve that first. But then the next step for the board is really just connecting the people on the board to the vision and the strategy of the organization. I find governance boards that are working on long-term strategy and building capacity of their organization, that's the right focus for a board. When boards get into arguing about things like vacuum cleaners, which is what happened to one of my boards, I was like, this is not a board issue. What are we doing talking about vacuum cleaners at the board level? So trying to support the board and focusing on those strategy level decisions and thinking ahead, that's really what the board, obviously there are working boards out there who are more active and engaged, but when you're working with a governance board, thinking about that strategy and just knowing the people on your board, that really makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. It's so important. And you've mentioned some really good things there, of course, the finance piece, and of course, the governance piece and working with your board. It can be really challenging to work with a board, especially when you're not all rowing in the same direction. Any advice for us, Kristina, as we think about trying to maybe help with that culture of philanthropy, for instance, or maybe it's around strategic planning or something like that, to try and help everybody go the same way?
Yeah, I think it's important that we recognize that boards don't always have to agree on everything. In fact, having that diversity of opinion can make a big difference and help bring out new insights into a board. So I think it's really important that we don't assume that if someone is being a little bit more argumentative or whatever, obviously it's about personality and connection. Like, we should all be kind, we should all be respectful of each other, but that doesn't mean that we can't have different opinions as to how something will be done. At the end of the day, as a board member, and this is really what we're going to get into in the board sessions more and more, but it is your job in a way to figure out, is this an issue where I really need to stand my ground on, or is this an issue where I can accept that the decision of the board might go in another direction and respectfully, step back from that. And even if something doesn't go the way you want, it's okay. And as an executive director, like, this is why the board is so key. You need to know you have their trust. The third thing I was going to mention, I talked about money and board. The third thing I was going to mention is the people. And I think and I don't just mean the people by the board members, I mean the people in terms of the team and the staff. And I know for some of you out there, you're part of a small nonprofit and you don't have any staff, and maybe you're not even a paid executive director. And I totally get that, because, when I started, I was just 10 hours a week, and it was very much a part-time gig. But I think it's those people connections that is what is stressful, in addition to the money side, because we're always worried about money. And yeah, Kat says, hi, Kat, nice to see you. But yes, the money keeps me up at night. But you know what? There is so much money to go around. It actually doesn't keep me up at night as much anymore, because I do feel like there's a lot of money out there for projects. At the end of the day, the harder part is making sure we tell our stories really well, that we treat our people really well, that we connect on the issues that matter. And then, of course, there's a lot of work that goes into fundraising. But that's where I really think we can build a culture of philanthropy while we're all working together on that piece.
Mm-hmm. a lot of executive directors that I've spoke to, especially small organizations, have indicated that sometimes they have something called imposter syndrome. Sometimes they're feeling like they're in the chair of executive director and they're kind of looking around for, the adult in the room and thinking they don't have the skills to be an executive director or to be in that place. And those quiet conversations can really kind of mess with them when it comes to the work that needs to get done. Is that something that you feel is prevalent in this sector?
Yeah, for sure. I think it is a lot of responsibility to be an executive director of a small shop, but to me, it's the best job in the world. Like, you have the chance to really work with amazing people, take action on issues affecting the environment around us. And so it's a real opportunity, but absolutely, it doesn't always come naturally. And even the fundraising side of things, that can be a really challenging skill to learn. And it does take time. Like, I didn't start out in 2005 knowing how to raise money. So I think part of the challenge is having the confidence to continue to go through those challenges, even when you don't, you aren't really sure what the outcome is. And it does take time to learn. That's the other thing. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time and it takes collaboration and this opportunity to connect with each other and learn from each other. And there's so much support out there in terms of, like, if I need help with something, I can call you up, Sam, and ask for your advice and your input. And there are so many people out there who are willing to collaborate and help. That's what I love about the intern program that I've been involved in this year. These incredible interns working together, supporting each other, helping each other fundraise. I mean, that is the kind of community spirit that we want to promote and showcase. And with the Capacity Building Institute, having that collective training and that shared set of resources. Like, why should we all invent the same tools if we can have some really great templates for minutes and agendas and different, things like that, simple things that would help make our job easier. This year, I created a template on the executive director report that you share at your board meetings. And that's been a really useful tool as we've tried to kind of build some resources for executive directors to help, make their jobs easier.
For sure, absolutely. Let me ask you this: when you're hiring staff, and some people, have that opportunity and some people won't, depending on their organization, do you hire for passion or do you hire for talent?
I think it depends on the role. That's a really interesting question, Sam. I think what determines whether or not you can do something is your mindset. So to me, if I meet somebody and they feel excited about what might be possible for them, even if they don't have all the skills and all the knowledge to do so, if they're open to learning and willing to learn, then there's a lot that you can help teach somebody. And at the same time, there's also a barrier in terms of giving people an opportunity. And that's why this year we focus so much on different programs like our BIPOC fellowship program and our various internship programs, because not everyone is given an equal opportunity to succeed in the world. And our nonprofit sector is very dominated by, white female leaders and like us. So it is important that we level the playing field and provide opportunities for everybody. But to me, what I'm more interested in is that passion and also a willingness to learn and an openness to make mistakes. Like, I make mistakes all the time and I learn from those. And it's about recognizing when you make a mistake, how can you grow and how can you develop yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think more and more people, are allowed to sort of, or they're permitting themselves to be vulnerable and saying, putting their hand up and saying, I made an error here, or I want to change something there. This has been a very challenging time, COVID, on many people. This sector in particular, I'm sure, has had its share of challenges. What are you hearing, Kristina, when you speak to executive directors about how they're balancing life and work during this time?
Yeah, I agree. It has been a really challenging time. And, there's a lot of self-care that we need to practice to help ourselves to continue. That's true. That was true before COVID. Executive directors are often the ones working way too much, struggling to keep all these balls in the air, having to manage, like, even this capacity building wheel that we showed earlier, trying to manage all of those things at the same time is challenging. So self-care is always important. We have a program called Grow, where we really encourage people to take that time for themselves and really build themselves up, because you're a better leader when you also take that time to really transform your own self. But I think, yeah, so I think we are not spending enough time in terms of the pandemic in that area. But what has been amazing about the pandemic, not the pandemic is not amazing, but about this time is that the opportunity to be virtual and collaborate across the country has really transformed. So the programs of the Capacity Building Institute, for example, we went from just meeting in Ottawa together with a bunch of executive directors. I mean, you were there, Sam, at many of our first sessions, to being able to do this virtually across the country. And so I think our opportunity for shared learning and not feeling alone, there's actually a new opportunity here that wasn't there several years ago, where we can really talk in detail about each other's situations. I mean, last week, Sam and I were on a call called the Fundraising Intensive, where we were going directly into talking about fundraising for 3 different groups and workshopping it right there on the spot with them. And these were groups from all over different regions. And so we wouldn't have had necessarily that same opportunity to do that if it wasn't for this new virtual reality. So I like to focus on the positive. Like, there's a lot of negativity out there, but I like to focus on what can we do and what can we do better in this new time of virtual learning. Now, don't get me wrong, I am an in-person person. Like, I love sitting across a table with someone. I like to take notes. I'm very tactile with my method of learning and remembering things, but it's opened up a whole new world of collaboration that I think we wouldn't have otherwise. So let's cherish that and build on it.
Absolutely. And Kristina, you mentioned a little bit earlier about making sure there's room at the table for everyone. You know, and a lot of executive directors will say, you know, the minute they become an executive director, they have to start thinking about their succession plan, right? Who around the table could I lift up? Who around the table is wanting those opportunities? And when I mean the table, not necessarily internally in your staff, but maybe the community. That succession planning is so important for transition, for the health of the organization. When you think about succession planning, what do you think some of the pitfalls people fall into when maybe they're a little bit nervous to do that? Some people can feel threatened by it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely understand that, because I'm involved in a lot of projects and I'm slowly transitioning out of some of them and trying to look into how to support new leaders and emergence. So I think having that trust and knowing that that there are other people out there who really want this opportunity and being able to encourage that, I think is one thing that can be really encouraging for ourselves. And at the same time, you know, I think you have to really work with your board to make succession planning part of everything, part of both the executive director role, but also for the board members' roles as well, because it's not just the ED that's going to transition at some point. One of the great projects I'm helping support right now is called Eco Executive Director, and it's a pilot for a shared ED service among small environmental groups. And we're not going to hear about that project today, but at one of our sessions, they'll likely be here as a sponsor. And it's just this idea that we can have some shared tools and resources to make that transition easier. But more importantly for succession planning is around vision and passion for the work. So for me, if you're not all in to what it is your organization is doing, then you need to be focusing on a job that you can get behind. Like, I am so excited about capacity building. I love it. I love working with small groups who are struggling and learning how to, you know, make their opportunities better for their organization. If they're suffering with board relations, if they're not getting along with the chair of their board, if there's no money, if they need staff, I love all that stuff. And I also love funding it, which is why I'm building this new foundation to help support that. But I think, you know, figuring out what it is that you love and what you're passionate about and then doing it, that's what is a big part of succession planning. Because for me, as I'm stepping down, for example, from Sustainable Eastern Ontario, where I've been the leader for almost 10 years of that organization, I want to know that there's some passion in helping support Eastern Ontario groups. You know, maybe they won't be as excited as I am, I don't know, but just having that vision and that willingness to really reach out and support the groups in this Eastern Ontario region.
Mm-hmm. How important is it, Kristina, for, you know, the executive director have a vision for the organization, the chair and the board has a vision for the organization? How important is it that they're aligned, and what if they aren't? I
think that's where the strategic plan is so critical. There needs to be a shared vision. I have definitely been involved in organizations where it's like you talk to 5 different board members and you get 5 different explanations as to what this organization does. And that is definitely going to be a problem, because how can you as an executive director execute on that? When I started at Tucker House, there were 18 volunteer committees. I was 10 hours a week and I was supposed to be on all 18 of them. So by the time my week finished, I had had so many meetings with different volunteer teams, I couldn't, even get any work done. So that was one of the first things that had to change, was like, this is overboard. We can't have this many different competing volunteer organizations, competing for each other's time, but also competing for the vision of the organization. We need to be on the same page, have a clear strategic plan. And then I think just a little bit of commitment to that, like it's often you get a couple new board members, they might be super excited to take things in a new direction. And while I love that kind of passion and energy, if you've just revamped your organization 3 times in the last 3 years, like at some point we have to solidify, here's what our plan is, and then stick to it for a few years, because things don't change as quickly as we would wish they would, right? And so sometimes that consistency and commitment to a vision actually does take a little bit of time. And so I do think like a strategic plan, working on a 3 to 5 year range, and we are actually working on a template strat planning document that people can use, and a tool. And again, these are the kinds of resources and information that we'll make available as part of these series. But this is an opportunity for people to really hone in on what it is we want to be doing, and don't make it so complicated. Like nowadays, you can have strategic plans that can be short and sweet and really just lay out a path. It used to be, some strat plans in the old days were like 50 pages. Like that is way too much. Like don't waste your time on that, right? Keep it simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And, when I think about all of the different ways that executive directors, share information, I know one area that is always tends to be in smaller organizations, not funded or funded very little, is communications. And ironically, that's a role that an executive director ends up taking on, because once again, another role, because there isn't the people or the people power behind that. Let's talk a little bit about communications, because of course you need that to support, well, let's just say it, everything you do.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, as the executive director, you're the chief spokesperson for your organization, right? So you need to have those key messages down of what your purpose is, and then figuring out ways to communicate that. But I would say absolutely, there's not always a lot of resources, and that storytelling piece, being able to tell the story of your organization, and is like a critical skill that we don't spend as much time focusing on. And the other thing I would say is you want your core team, your board members, and your other key partners within the organization to also be confident about what it is the story is in terms of the organization. But it might be different, like the story might be slightly different, because what's important is that it's real and authentic. So for me, the stories that I bring to the table about my organization are going to relate a little bit to what I've gone through and how I connect with this theme or this organization, and someone else might have a different story. So it's really important that it is real to you, and at the same time, there should be some shared messaging about what it is that the organization does that can be shared across the team.
Absolutely. Catherine's made a really good point. So many different aspects of communications, and most of them could be their own job in and of themselves, right? And such a good point. There's the website and social media and crisis plans and all those good things. We think about, I go back to November of 2019. I did a session at a big conference that had, 4,000 people at it or something. And I did a session called, "Oh no, how to plan for the day you hope never comes." Well, we didn't know 4 months from then we would be all put into a crisis situation. And it's really one of the last things that I find small organizations have, because of people power, is a crisis communications plan. Can you speak a little bit about that, Kristina?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't have one for all of my groups that I work with, to be honest with you. I think going to Catherine's point is like, sometimes it's just hard to keep your head above water because there are so many jobs you're doing as an executive director. And I think one of the first things you have to do in a crisis or at any time is just, number one, accept that there are way too many things to do in the amount of time that there is to do it. So part of your job as the ED is just learning how to prioritize and also acknowledging that you can only do so much in a day, right? You can only do so much. And at the end of the day, you need to pull back, take a break, and then restart again the next day. So for me, crisis management is partly sometimes about rejigging the priorities. I would say for environmental organizations, we've been hit really hard in this pandemic because funding has often dried up for the sector, and grants that would have maybe come to us have been going obviously to very important social causes and needs, but it's meant that environmental groups are really struggling to just maintain basic levels of staffing and support. And that's a reality for many small shops across this country. And so I don't want to downplay that. But I would say, yeah, trying to be prepared in terms of risk management is a challenge. And sometimes we do have to roll with the punches in what's happening. But part of it is about, the more we can think ahead and make sure we have a strong team behind us and that support system in place, and also other people we can talk to, that's all going to help make us more resilient in the face of the crisis.
For sure. This next question is sort of a double whammy, if you will. So how do you measure your success as an executive director? And second to that, which I think ties in really nicely, is how do you work with a board that's giving you feedback on the work that you've done and measuring you maybe in another way than you're measuring yourself?
Well, for Tucker House, for example, when I started, we didn't have any real measures of success. And so one of my opportunities was to create a strat plan that had very clear SMART goals. And it was a way to kind of set up how to measure. So in a way, it was funny though, because that first strat plan I did was so complicated and there were so many goals, it was impossible to reach all of them. And then I felt like I'd kind of failed, right? Because I couldn't report on all of them. But what we did learn from that experience and grow from was like having those clear SMART goals that were measurable, and then being able to come back every year and report to the board, okay, where are we with our strat plan and those measurable results? Those are important. So numbers are important, and having something you can measure against is important. But there's also a level of success that is not as easy to quantify, right? That is more about the quality of relationships of the people we're working with, our partnerships that we have, and our client base, or whatever you consider. Environmental groups don't really have clients in quite the same way. But in terms of the people you serve, what are those relationships like? And I always, as the executive director, like to take a step back and look at those relationships. And if there's a problem with that area, that needs to be solved in order to really measure success as an organization.
Mm-hmm. And Kate Potter's just had a really, really good point here. What happens when you get no feedback from your board?
Yeah, Kate, nice to hear from you. Absolutely. Yeah, some of you out there who are EDs, like who sent an email out to their board with some update, like, oh my gosh, we just got this great grant, or this is going on, and literally nobody responds to your email. And you're just like, am I talking to anybody here? Hello. So that absolutely happens often. That hasn't happened that much with me, with my SEO board. They've been pretty good about that. But yeah, it's definitely a common thing where you send out a message and you want some constructive feedback and nobody responds. And that isn't actually always a good thing. I have a good friend of mine who's an executive director, and she basically said to her board, like, step up and give me a response when I ask for one, because I'm not, bugging you all the time for answers, but this is an opportunity for some kind of response. So I try to make it very clear what I'm looking for a response for on what issue. Like, here's a time where we need a decision. But I also let them know that it's sometimes good just to get a response to say, great, I've had a look, this looks fun. And Kate, on the performance issue, I would say that performance reviews are a must, because for me as an executive director, I can't conduct performance reviews of my staff or other people if I'm not getting a performance review conducted on me. And so my first big request from my board is, you need to do a performance review on me. Now, sometimes that's been challenging, and it's like I'm the one preparing all the paperwork for my own performance review, and that's kind of a pain. But I would say that it is something that as you continue to work on it, that does get better. And we do have some great ED performance review tools available out there. So if anyone is out there who's an ED and not getting a performance review, that's the first thing I would ask for, because that is a way to measure your success.
For sure, absolutely. I could honestly talk to you forever. We're going to take
I feel that way too.
And honestly, keep the questions. Like, if you've got questions, throw them in that chat, and we'll make sure to share them with Kristina. It's my pleasure at this point to introduce Eric Pervin, of course, from Green Books. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. And it's been a pleasure to hear Kristina and Sam chat a little bit. I'm just going to take a minute and shift gears. I am here on behalf of Green Books, a full service bookkeeping social enterprise. And as Kristina mentioned, this has been a project related to sustainable Eastern Ontario for a number of years. And we've recently incorporated into our own entity. And we're really honored to be able to be here today to tell you a little bit about what we do. But really, I want to talk to you about why finances matter and why a financial system matters. And so before I jump right in, just wanted to share a little more about Green Books. Really what we specialize in is helping small shop nonprofits grow their organizations. And we do this by supporting bookkeeping, but also budgeting and fundraising and a suite of other services. So over the last 6 years, we've helped dozens of organizations develop robust financial systems and help break out of this cycle of starvation that cripples many new and small organizations. So I was asked to come today to talk a little bit about some tips and tricks. I was really excited about the opportunity and started thinking about how I wanted to frame the discussion. So what I want to share with you today is, I think, a key message that is, however, rarely discussed. And actually, Kristina, in her story at the start, is a great example of this. And the basic idea is that good books are critical to happy people. And so what I'm getting at is that bookkeeping, although it might not sound like it at first blush, is really a human resources priority. It's an HR issue. And I really want to talk about the people today and not focus as much on profits. So just a quick overview, a little bit of a summary. I want to think about the question of who suffers when your books are a mess? Who's harmed by bad bookkeeping? What's the first principle of finance is the second thing I want us to think about. And then what's our solution? Spoiler alert, the solution is just keep all your supporting documents, keep everything, will always help. But let's dive in. So when we think about bad books or unorganized books, we often think of the organization being the one that suffers. You can't deliver on a grant, or you can't report properly. And although those are important problems, really those who suffer most directly are the employees, team members, colleagues, and friends. So today I want to sort of convince you that good bookkeeping is a moral imperative, that we have to keep good financial records because it's the right thing to do to treat our team well. And hopefully I'll give you a bit of a newfound appreciation for some of the subtle ways that good books make happy teammates, they improve mental health and our work experience, which in turn increases retention, saving us money, getting more done with less, growing your organization, and so on. So I want to start with a basic premise, which is if you don't know what you have, you can't make informed decisions about what to do. And Kristina spoke about this at the top, right? One of the first things she'll ask about when she comes in is what are the numbers, what's coming in, what's going out. So I've seen this play out in a lot of different organizations in different ways, but without fail, those that have a solid grasp on their accounts are in a better position to deliver on their mission and to treat their staff well. So a typical scenario might run like this. Write in the chat if any of this sounds familiar. You're in a budgeting session and you're wondering about staffing for the next year. You run some quick numbers and you think, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to keep everyone on at full time. And then you get a little deeper and you realize that some of the budget numbers actually are a little out of date. They're just estimates that you put in at the start of the year, and you don't have any of the new or current data yet. So then you kind of start looking at your assumptions from last year and you see that you actually never put in the actuals beside the budget. So you're not sure what you actually spent last year. So then you dig a little deeper and you look at your budget and you look at your accounting software and you realize that the account structure, what you call the different line items, don't even match up. You have different names in different places. And now hang on a second, you are using an accounting software, right? Anyways, let's say you look up and you realize you're really not sure how much you can trust a lot of these numbers anyways. And you want to err on the side of caution because you feel an obligation to your donors to spend the money well, and you want to be fiscally responsible. So this can, as Kristina shared, it actually has happened, right? This can lead to small errors which have huge consequences, and people's contracts maybe they don't get renewed, or maybe they just get delayed until the new year, and you have this uncertainty and this stress and anxiety that affects so many people in your organization. And so goes the cycle, and it can be really hard to break. This is one example of the way that finances can become really a human resources issue, and it has ripple effects through your entire organization. That typical scenario is, an expansion when you have a project, and then the contraction, and expansion and contraction. You're always starting with new people. Onboarding is draining and difficult. You don't get to create the meaningful, lasting relationships. It exacerbates the feeling of loneliness for an executive director as the only one who has sort of continuity. It puts a lot of pressure of institutional memory on you, and I can go on. But all of this starts with the first principle of finance. All of this can be traced back to just this simple idea of knowing what you have. And I like to say, not just know what you have, but know what you owe and know what you're owed, because it's a bit of a more holistic and frankly more accurate description of your financial position. So fear not, however, because luckily this really doesn't have to be hard. What I'll walk you through today is just a really simple process, a couple suggestions of how to keep your money in order. And every group that I've worked with that has done this has had a much easier time to manage their finances. And what we see often is that those that kind of slack off on these like little things that don't seem to have huge implications end up with huge headaches down the road, because they can't answer the most basic and terrifying question that an auditor or a board member might ask you. What was this transaction for? And if that causes you concern or you're not sure, these are the kinds of tips that will really make your life a lot easier. So really they revolve around this idea of keeping records clean and clear. What we want to start with is just keep everything, every supporting document, every receipt, everything you can really helps, because every transaction matters, and you should be able to basically defend why the organization spent money on this thing or that thing. And really it's just as simple as keeping that documentation. What's important here, I mean, this is sort of a basic concept, but what I think is more interesting is it's helpful to cultivate a culture of record keeping and to take it seriously. So in the organization, there should be a respect for keeping these things at hand and being sort of quite rigorous in tracking them and making sure that people submit receipts for reimbursements and things like that. But it doesn't have to be aggressive. And this is where that balance can be sometimes hard for some organizations to strike. There's a kind of draconian, really intense financial person or department where it becomes a bit of a chore. And really what we find works better is there's just this respect for the fact that like we need this kind of documentation, and you cultivate, similar to a culture of philanthropy, just a culture of record keeping, and try to explain to the team why it matters, because we all kind of need to chip in to keep everything up to date. So that's sort of like the key point, is this culture of record keeping. That's the first suggestion. And the second is to enter these things into your books at regular intervals. So whether you're doing it or you have a bookkeeper who's helping you, or some combination of treasurer, etc., doing it more frequently is really, really helpful, because memory is fickle and things become incredibly infuriating when you've sort of forgotten what all this is for. It just becomes a mix of transactions. And so when it's kind of fresh in your mind, it's so much faster to say, oh, I remember this, I remember that. I can properly account for all of it quite readily. And even just waiting a month later, a month longer than you would, it's just shocking how much can disappear from our memories. The next thing is develop a bit of a system every time you receive funds, where you know exactly what key pieces of information you need for that project, grant, or agreement. And that information should be written down somewhere where everybody who's participating in the project can access it. So these are really the things that you need to absolutely know. I'm going to give you like the short list, and your needs may vary a little bit, but without this, you are lost. But with it, your life will be very, very easy. And it's just those basic things that often live in our heads, but just writing down the start date of the project, the end date of the project, a little description of the activity, or just something like, what is this money for? How much money is it? So the total amount. And then ideally, a kind of a budget, a little bit of a breakdown of, let's say we have $10,000, how much should be used on each activity, and some deliverables if it's a grant. It's good to keep those there as well. But really, those are some of those key things that at the end of the year can help you answer that question of, what do we have? What do we owed? What do we owe? You know, that key information is really gets you a long way. And then finally, I just want to encourage you all to consider using accounting software of some kind. It doesn't need to be expensive, but it does take some time to learn. And the advantage here is that it's much more reliable, excuse me, and it's harder to corrupt. And as Kristina, you know, we heard from Kristina earlier, small calculation errors can have huge differences. And if you're using the accounting software properly, it can be a lot more resilient to, you know, slips of the finger and accidents like that. So the take home is that as soon as you doubt the integrity of your books, you will struggle to make critical decisions. You're flying blind or playing with fire. But you can follow some pretty simple steps, which will allow you to happily trust your numbers and confidently grow your organization. So I want to thank everyone for listening and for joining us today, and thank Christine and Sam for this amazing series. If anyone wants to have a free consultation with us at Green Books to discuss your financial position, please reach out to us today to book a meeting with me or Chantel, our client engagement coordinator. Really, we exist to power your mission. And so we'll be happy to create a custom package to meet your needs or budget, whether you're volunteer-led or fully staffed, we're here for you. So thanks for listening.
Wow, I'm actually really excited about money and accounting now, Eric. Thank you for that. Takes a lot from me, so fantastic. We, of course, have a few minutes left. If we have any questions for Kristina, or of course, I've got lots of questions for Kristina, so we can always keep going with those as well. Kristina, what did you think about Eric's presentation?
Thanks, Eric. That was really great. And of course, I think Green Books is a great opportunity for small shops that need that help with financial services. So definitely check out their website. I noticed a few questions in the Q&A section here. And also Charlie, I saw that you put one in the chat. I did want to say that on the topic of the boards, we're going to really get into that next month in November. So I think maybe we'll cover that one. Charlie, you asked about the how do you navigate a newer experienced board versus a well-established board. That's one of the topics we're going to talk about. And also the person who asked about how to navigate a board that doesn't govern or do helpful work. I do want to say that for the November session, you know, get your boards here to this meeting as much as possible, because one of the things I'm going to talk about is what practical tips that board members can do to help support their executive director. And so I really want to speak in those meetings that are board focused to the board members, but it'll also be about, you know, how you as an ED can support your board as well. So it's a two-way street, but absolutely there are tons of things that a board member can be doing to make an ED's life, you know, better. And so that's a big topic that we're going to be talking about as well.
I see
Tracy, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I see a great question here about grants. I can share that question if you'd like, Kristina.
Yeah, I think just the part about the admin overhead from Tracy, that really caught my attention. I'm not sure if everyone can see it, but do you want to summarize it there, Sam?
Sure. Tracy wrote, I have a very specific question about applying for grants and what percentage should be allocating for admin overhead. Until now, we've been a very small, only 2 times staff plus bookkeeper managing 80 volunteers. That's certainly a lot. And most of our funding has been project-based. But I need more support, and I want to hire an operations manager to alleviate the administrative burden so I can focus on our campaign. So how do I figure out how to fund that? Help?
So absolutely, Tracy, the question of how to fund admin is one of the huge challenges of our job as executive directors. And the first thing I will say is that in terms of applications that you're writing, we really do have to look to the funder to figure out what is acceptable within their limits. So some funding organizations will say you can only have up to 10% toward admin, and others will say 20%, but that's about as high as I've seen, unless you're applying to the Sustainable Capacity Foundation, because we are here to support administration. And so we will allow up to 100% of our grant to go towards admin. And that's the reason why we're trying to be different. And I would just say that this is one of my passion projects that I'm really focused on trying to build awareness out there, is that we can't run organizations without overhead and admin. So as funders, we need to be doing way more to support that. And it's a message I'm sharing when I'm in various funder collaboratives, is to try to figure out how can we support what the organizations really need to help keep their lights on and to help provide this. In terms of staffing costs, I would say that if you want to connect to the project called Eco Internships and have some interns help you with some of your staffing needs, that is a great solution for some of these shorter term pieces. And then we are also trying to build capacity around Eco Executive Director to help to share some of this work. But obviously, someone who you want as a manager is going to need a bit more experience and that sort of thing. So I just want to say that I understand and I can relate that this is a challenge. It is really hard to find unrestricted donations and unrestricted gifts that help you support administration and overhead. And that is one of the major challenges we have as executive directors. So I'm always pushing the envelope in terms of talking to funders and saying, well, how much can we ask for admin? I would also say that whenever possible, in every single grant as an executive director, you should always absolutely be asking for admin dollars, even if you think this particular project doesn't need it, because we do have other things we need to fund within the organization where administration matters. So it is absolutely a challenge for sure.
For sure. Got a great question here from Jacob. Is it possible to be an effective ED without being quote unquote on and reachable outside of normal working hours? Any strategies for setting those boundaries and still being successful?
Yeah, this one hits close to home because while people may think I work a lot now, you should have seen what it was like when I was working in the government, as well as with my part-time ED job and other things. And I would be working like 14 days straight, 2 days off, 14 days straight, 2 days off. And now I have a family. I have 4 kids and I'm pushing 40. So I want to have a little more balance in my life. And I want to be able to, go home at the end of the workday and have dinner with my family. And that's really important. And so, there are seasons for sure when there's a lot of grant deadlines due and there's, new government funding opens up. So I'm pulling late nights in that, period, but I like to think of it as going in waves. And so maybe I like waves so much because I've gone on a sailing sabbatical with my family and I was able to kind of unwind for an extended period of time with my family. But having those waves where you can be very, very busy and intense and working like crazy, but then you're taking the corresponding time to be able to take time with your family. So for me, when I go away for the weekend, I turn my phone off and people know they're not going to reach me on the weekend. There aren't a lot of emergencies in our work environment that can't wait for another day. Sometimes there are emergencies, but most of the time we fabricate emergencies in the sense that, we always think everything has to be answered today. I think sometimes we can give ourselves a break and say like, you know what, I don't need to check my email at 11 o'clock at night. I can wait until tomorrow. So part of the boundary setting is for yourself to remember. Like I took my work emails off my phone recently because I was checking my emails at home late in the evening. And I was like, I don't need to be doing this. I'm sitting here with my family. I don't need to have my phone on checking work emails at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night. Now, sometimes I'll stay at the office and work late if I need to, or be at a board meeting. But part of that is setting your own boundaries. And that is, to be honest, Jacob, one of the most challenging things to do as an ED is learning how to set those boundaries. Absolutely. So I just want to say thanks so much, Sam, for being part of the session today. And I've seen lots of great, messages out there from great people who are part of the sector. We have an amazing environmental sector in Canada and amazing people like those of you who are on the call who are part of the sector. So let's support each other in growing and making it stronger, because that's how we can really succeed and make a difference for what I think is the most important issue of our time to be able to take action on.
Excellent. It's been my pleasure and my honor to spend time. We did promise we'd get everybody off by 5 o'clock. It's 5:01. So we wanted to thank you so much for joining us. We know, as we mentioned, there is the session coming up for board members. So we hope that you inspire others to come and you join us as well.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye.